Alright guys, so now I'm going to rank the greatest centers of all time. This is to finish off my series of ranking all the greatest basketball players based on position. So I already did a video on ranking the greatest point guards, shooting guards, small forwards, and power forwards, and now I'm finishing off with greatest centers of all time. So yeah, as usual, got the top 40 right here, the top 1 to 10, top 10 to 20, top 20 to 30, and then who I think is below top 30 or 30 to 40. And then on the right here, I have the list of some of the greatest centers to play, and I'm going to be ranking them, and you guys can see what my thought process is on where I rank these guys, okay? All right, so starting off from the side here, okay, we got Brad Daugherty. Brad Daugherty had a very short career because his career is limited by injuries, but when he was playing, he was a pretty decent center. Um, Probably, not like Hakeem level or Robinson level, obviously, but definitely one of the better centers of the period. However, because his team never really won anything, and some people even consider Mark Price the better player of his team, not Brad Daugherty. So I can't rank him that high. I have to put him below top 30 because I felt like his maybe if his career was a bit longer, would have been good. Maybe could have put him up here. His stats are really good, but yeah, just a short career, and his team didn't really make it very far. All right, DeAndre Jordan, I'm gonna put down here as well. DeAndre Jordan's a good defensive player, good rebounder, but he's like a third option player. And more so than that, the Clippers team with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin didn't really win anything. So if you can't get past the second round, then right, and you're the third option for that team, then I can't put you very high, right? And plus, he only has one All-Star appearance, so I'm also gonna put Clyde Lovellette here as well. So Clyde Lovellette, won a championship for the Lakers. Interestingly enough, he played for almost all the major teams of the times. So he played for the Lakers, the Minneapolis Lakers, and then he played for the Hawks, and then he played for the Celtics, and then he won rings with the Lakers and the Celtics. So it's interesting. He played for almost all the major teams of the time that was contending. So it's interesting. So yeah, that's why he's in this list, but I can't put him very high because I don't think he was the best player on any of those teams. Right? For the Hawks, you got Pettit and Cliff Hagan, who was better. On the Lakers, you got Mike and Pollard and Mickelson. And then on the Celtics, you got Russell and Heinsohn and Cousy and Sam Jones, right? So he wasn't the best player in any of those teams, or even close to the best player in any of those teams. So that's why I got him here. But he was a solid contributor for those teams. So yeah, that's where I'm putting that guy. Marc Gasol, I'm gonna put him down here as well. Good defensive player. Possibly the best player in Grizzlies history, along with his brother Paul. Not really sure which one is considered better for Grizz. One of them is considered, one of the Gasol brothers is considered the best player in Grizzlies history, but I think he has to be up here as well because he was the leader of that team and led the Grizzlies to several playoff runs, although they didn't win anything. But yeah, he won a ring with the Raptors eventually. But anyways, he wasn't the main contributor for that team either. So yeah, that's why I got put him down here, but pretty solid player as a contributor. I got to put Arnie Risen down here as well. Actually, for that Royals team that won in the early 50s with Bob Wanzer and Bob Davies, Arnie Risen was actually probably the top performer in the playoffs and probably should have won Finals MVP if they had him back then. But yeah, for those reasons, that's why he's up here. But I can't put him very high because overall his career, was nothing. If you look at his stats and stuff like that, it wasn't anything that special. It's just based on that Royals championship run and being the best player in that team, and just being like one of the early great centers. I guess that's why I had to put him out here. And same thing with Larry Faust as well. Just being one of the great early centers, 8-time All-Star. Played for the Pistons. The Fort Wayne Pistons is what they were known as at the time. So similar to Harry Gallatin, which I ranked on my power forward list. I can't rank a lot of these older players that high now, but just based on their impact of their era, that's why I still have to put them here. So yeah, Larry Faust goes down here as well. Okay, next I got Alonzo Mourning. So Alonzo Mourning, very good defensive player. Probably his career was shortened, right, because he had that kidney disease. But when he was contending, he's pretty good. So where should I put Alonzo Mourning? I'm going to put him in the top 20 to 30 range, I think. Because when he was in his prime, he was considered good, but he wasn't, a top tier center or anything like that. But very solid defensive player, and yeah, definitely considered one of the top centers of his day, just not at the very top, right? And probably the best player for his Miami Heat teams, along with it was like Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning of those teams. So yeah, they were definitely contending, but they didn't win anything. Not like they went to the finals with that Heat team, right? Al Horford, solid contributor type of player, right? He's still multiple-time All-Star, but he wasn't like a superstar level, just like a star level player that became a solid contributor for a lot of his teams. Didn't win anything, but those Hawks teams actually were pretty good a lot of the times. They didn't get very far because of LeBron, but they're still pretty good teams, decent teams. So I would say how Horford goes here. Just a solid contributor. Some might say the best player on those Hawks teams, but they didn't go anywhere, so that's where I had to put him. Next I have, let's see, a lot of these guys. Okay, George Mikan. George Mikan has to be top 10 because his impact on his era, like he won 5 championships, part of the first dynasty of the NBA, considered the best player in the league for pretty much all the time he was playing. And he pioneered a lot of the stuff that big men and superstars use today. He was kind of considered the first superstar of the league, right? And the best player for 5 championship teams. You can even check the stats. If you go to the playoff stats, Mikan was clearly the best player for his team, and would have won several MVPs and Finals MVPs that they had him back then. Caused goaltending, shot clock, all those things to be implemented in the league. So just of his impact alone, he has to be top 10. Right? And we are ranking based on their own era here, right? We're not trying to compare eras, saying who's better across eras. Obviously, Mikan wouldn't do too well today, but in his time, in his impact, you got to say he's top 10 level of impact. Ben Wallace, I'm going to put in top 20, 30 as well. He is I would say better defender than Mourning is at his peak, but his offensive game wasn't as good as Mourning's, which is why he's probably still going to be this range, but probably ranked lower than Zoe. But Ben Wallace still has to be up here because he is one of the best defenders ever, right? 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, won a ring, and beat the Lakers, and he was the only All-Star on that team. So that has to be worth something, right? He was probably the first or second best player on that Pistons team in the mid-2000s, which actually made a run at the finals twice. They went to the finals twice and went to the conference finals like 6 times or something like that. So that's got to be worth something. So I'm put Ben Wallace up there. Wilt's an easy one. I'm just going to put Wilt in top 10 here because he's, arguably some people consider him one of the greatest player of all time, the GOAT, but that's only if you look at the stats, right? Stat-wise, yeah, Wilt's the GOAT, even more than Jordan, because his stats are just unbelievable. He has over 70 NBA records, right? But the problem is he didn't win as much as Bill Russell did, and that kind of brings him down. His playoffs averages are all lower, so he stumbles when it comes to the playoffs, I think. His regular season numbers are really good. He's really obviously one of the best offensive players ever, and also one of the best defensive players ever. So very complete player. Just yeah, he's considered by some to be the GOAT, but at least by a lot of people, by me, I consider him top 5 all time. So obviously he has to be top 10 center, right? So Wilt Chamberlain is legendary, so he definitely needs to be up there. Okay, some of these other guys. Nate Thurmond. Nate Thurmond is a top 10 to 20 guy. His defense was probably on the level of Wilt. Kareem said that he was the hardest player to play against because of his defense. So that's definitely worth something. And I think Wilt also said that as well. That Thurmond was the hardest to play. And he's one of the greatest rebounders too, because he rebounded like 15 rebounds a game, which is, one of the highest ever. Wasn't that efficient, but yeah, just because of his defensive rebounding, and the fact that his offensive game is he's better at defense than Mourning. I would consider him better at defense than Mourning, about as equal to Ben Wallace, but his offensive game is like better than Ben Wallace's, so he has to be a level above. So putting Nate Thurmond up here. Even though he didn't win a ring, but still he was the alpha dog for several years. All right, some of these other guys I'm gonna put. Okay, Bill Laimbeer I'm gonna put down here. Bill Laimbeer was, well, first of all, a lot of people don't like Bill Laimbeer because he was such a dirty player. But if aside from that, Bill Laimbeer was a pretty good rebounder. He actually led all players in rebounding in the 80s, right? If you count just the 80s, and he was a pretty decent outside shooter as well. Like way before stretch bigs were really common, he was a pretty decent outside shooter too. But he was never the alpha dog for his team. He was like the third or fourth option on his team. So yeah, the Bad Boy Pistons definitely a dynasty. Being the third or fourth best option, being a good rebounder, outside shooter, and defender. Yeah, so this is pretty much where he belongs, I think. Okay, then I got Walt Bellamy. I'm gonna put in the top 20 to 30 range. Multiple time All-Star. But that was pretty much it. He never really won anything. But his stats are pretty good. He's like 20 and 14 a game. So I guess you can attribute that to the faster pace back then, but still better stats than most of the other players of his era. So he was definitely pretty solid offensive player back then. Right, a solid 20 and 14 guy, I guess. So his stats are pretty good even for the time. So yeah, just based on that, I got to put him 20 to 30 because even though he didn't win anything else, just multiple time All-Star and averaging that much, we'll put him there. So the other guys, Dikembe Mutombo. It's interesting. I would actually put Mutombo maybe in the 10 to 20 range because similar to Thurmond, I feel like he has a better offensive game than Ben Wallace, but he's just as good of a defender as Ben Wallace. Now, I don't think he's as good offensively as Thurmond because Thurmond still averaged like 15 a game. Dikembe didn't even average 10 a game. But defense-wise, he's on par with Wallace and Thurmond, but he has a better offensive game than Wallace. So yeah, I think he's going to be in that range. Andre Drummond, I'm going to put down here because he didn't win anything. He's just a really, really good rebounder. I guess you can consider Andre Drummond one of the best rebounders of all time now because he's won his 4th rebounding title, which is pretty insane. So definitely Andre Drummond, not a good shooter, but a really great rebounder. And probably the best rebounder of his era. And what does that get you? Well, that probably gets you on this this bottom tier right here, right? Which is probably where he belongs. Okay, Moses Malone, definitely top 10, right? Excellent rebounder, especially offensively. He has the most offensive rebounds all time, 3-time MVP, the best player for a championship team, right? Finals MVP for the 83 76ers. Yep, very, very dominant in his prime. I remember he would own every other center of his era, including Kareem, right? Just in his prime, he was absolutely dominant. So he has to be top 10. That's easy. Hakeem's also pretty easy, top 10 player. Yeah, I mean, just all-around great player, offensively and defensively, very polished. One of the greatest defensive players ever. One of the greatest post moves player ever, right? With his dream shake. And yeah, just 2 rings as the best player. 2 Finals MVPs. What's really impressive is that he won both those rings without another All-Star on his team. Actually, I mean, he has Otis Thorpe for the first run and Clyde Drexler for the second run, but neither of those guys were actually All-Stars the seasons that he won his championships in. So technically, he won both of those championships without another All-Star, which is really impressive, right? And he basically dominated every other center of his time, including Robinson, Shaq, you know. Ewing, yeah, whatever you want to mention, he dominated them. So he's got to be up there. Russell's also easy, top 10 center all time. Some people consider him the GOAT, right? Because he's got 11 rings. That's the most all time of any professional athlete in any North American sport. He's 10-0 in Game 7s, right? He's very, very clutch, very, very competitive, killer instinct, whatever you want to call it. Excellent rebounder. Wilt's actually the all-time leading rebounder, but Russell's very close behind at number 2. Just did whatever it took for his team to win, and a lot of people consider him the greatest defensive player of all time because the way he revolutionized defense, right? Especially his team defense, his help defense. his basketball IQ, just the ultimate winner, right? So Bill Russell has to be up there. Easy. Okay, so Shaq has to be up here as well, top 10, because Shaq was so dominant for his time. Maybe not as dominant as Wilt Chamberlain in his time, but still, right? In the late 2000s or late 90s and early 2000s, right? No one could stop Shaq, right? In the finals, he was putting up crazy numbers like 35 points, 38 points a game, 14 rebounds, 16 rebounds a game. Just no one could stop him, right? Pacers, 76ers, Nets didn't have any answer for him. Um, and yeah, just 4 rings and an MVP. Yeah, I mean, you just with all those accolades and stats, you just have to be top 10 all time, right? So that's easy as well. Okay, Patrick Ewing, I would put top 10 all time as well. Even though he never won a ring, and even though he's clearly on a level below these other guys, except for Mikan, but he's a level below these guys right here. But Ewing's still really good for his time. You know, he was multiple time All NBA second team in the 90s, and that 90s was dominated by big men. Um, you know, he went to the finals twice actually in '94 and '99. Even though like Hakeem beat him, you know, obviously he's better. But you know that doesn't mean that Ewing was bad, right? Ewing was still a really good player. So that's why he still has to be up here, just a little bit towards the bottom of the top 10. But I would still put Ewing in the top 10. So it's still a really good center. Shooting with those mid-range shots and fadeaways as well. Pretty good at those. David Robinson has to be top 10 as well. David Robinson, probably the second best center of the 90s after Hakeem, because he wasn't quite at Hakeem's level, obviously, especially in the playoffs. But in the regular season, he was arguably just as good as Hakeem, right? Maybe even better, because he scored 71 points, had a quadruple double, just really, really very athletic, dominant in the regular season, right? So I think David Robinson, and a very good defensive player as well. So defense-wise, he was very close to Hakeem, maybe even on par with Hakeem on defense. So, and on offense, he was also as good at, also on par with Hakeem, maybe in the regular season as well. It's just in the playoffs, Hakeem was better. But in the regular season, I think Robinson was every bit as good as Hakeem. So that's why he has to be still in the top 10. So, okay. What other player? It's getting hard to decide these players here. Okay, Artis Gilmore I think is the top 10 center of all time, and the reason is because I think Artis Gilmore is quite underrated, and the reason is because he played most of his prime in the ABA. So most people don't realize how dominant he was, but in the ABA, people call him the Wilt Chamberlain of the ABA, right? When someone calls you the Wilt Chamberlain of anything, that means you're extremely dominant, right? So Artis Gilmore being like that strong and that powerful and that tall in the ABA was considered the best big in the ABA. And you know he won a ring, he won a Finals MVP, he won an MVP, and he was considered the best big man in that league. So that's got to be worth something. And then when he came to the Bulls in the NBA, he was still pretty good. Although he didn't win anything in the NBA. But he's still considered pretty good and a pretty good defender. Offense-wise, he's, not a shooter or anything like that. But I think if you put him in the post, he could still be pretty effective. So he has the highest field goal percentage of all time, right? He always takes very efficient shots. So anyways, Artis Gilmore, just due to his ABA career, in combination with the Bulls part of his NBA career. I think the Spurs, he played pretty decently as well. But I think he has to be top 10 when you consider all his accolades. And if you total up his career with the ABA, I think he has to be top 10. All right. And then Kareem obviously is a top 10 player as well. So it's a no-brainer. Some people consider Kareem the greatest. 6 MVPs, 6 rings, 2 Finals MVPs, arguably 3 Finals MVPs, because Magic took that 80 Finals MVP away from him. But yeah, considered obviously the most dominant center of the 1970s, most unstoppable move of all time with the skyhook, all-time leading scorer, right? So when you average 24 and 11 for 20 seasons, So it tells you how durable, how consistent Kareem was. So obviously Kareem has to be top 10. There's no debate there. So we got that top 10 sorted out. The next tier, I think Willis Reed belongs in there. So Willis Reed, the best player of those Knicks teams, actually, maybe the second best player because some people consider Frazier better. But Willis Reed definitely belongs up here as well because he won 2 rings, an MVP, 2 Finals MVPs. Just all those accolades stacks up, right? He didn't play very long, but when he did play, he won a lot, right? So that matters. Averaged 19 and 13 in his career. Pretty decent defensive player as well. Just being an alpha dog, right? He definitely led those teams, and that's why he was the captain of those Knicks teams. Clear alpha dog of his of the Knicks dynasty. So that's why he deserves to be up there. Dwight Howard, I think, is also a top 20 center. Deserves to be up here as well. People forget that Dwight was really dominant in his prime, defensively at least. He was a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, 5-time rebounding leader, and led a team to the finals, right? That's actually as the best player, which has to account for something, right? His second best player was Hedo Turkoglu, right? I mean, it has to account for something when you lead a team like that to the finals. So yeah, Dwight in his prime was really, really good, and he was a clearly probably second best center of the 2000s after Shaq. So just for that, he has to be in this range, I think. You know, obviously not as good as the players up here. He wasn't very polished offensively, but I think just for his accolades and accomplishments, he deserves to be there. Mel Daniels has to be here as well, top 10 to 20. People don't know about Mel Daniels very well because he played almost pretty much his entire career in the ABA. But in the ABA, he won 3 rings and 2 MVPs, so that has to be worth something. He was the all-time ABA rebounder, right? He averaged 15 rebounds a game. So that leading a league like all time in something has to be considered for something, right? In this case, you know, leading the ABA all-time rebounds and winning 3 rings, 2 MVPs, which means he never won a Finals MVP. I think because Roger Brown, George McGinnis, Freddie Lewis, all these other great players were on the team. But still, right? I mean, he has Steph Curry's level of accolades there, right? With 3 rings and 2 MVPs. Now he's not as good as Steph Curry, but having that level of accomplishment is still something, right? So being that dominant in the ABA, being the leader of that Pacers dynasty in the ABA, that's why he has to be up here. And it's unfortunate not many people know about him because he played his career in the ABA, but he definitely deserves to be top 10 to 20. And then who else I have here is Bill Walton, I think, should be top 10 to 20 as well. Because even though his career is very short, his 2 healthy seasons, he was really, really good. Right? He won MVP, a championship, finals MVP, was the best player of his team, the alpha dog. He's the closest thing to Bill Russell we've seen as a white player, right? Really good passer, rebounder, and defensive player. So just for that short prime, I know his career, if his career had been longer, he'd probably top 10. But as it is, given his shortened career, that's why I had to put him in this range. Yeah, but he was still really good when he was healthy, so that's why I had to put him there. Okay, some of these other guys. Wes Unseld, I think, has to be Wes Unseld has to be here as well, because he was the leader of 4 finals teams. Okay, so people don't realize this, but in the 70s, the team that reached the finals the most was actually the Washington Bullets, and Wes Unseld led all those teams. So in 71, 75, 78, 79, Wes Unseld led all those teams, and he wasn't the most defensive player, right? He wasn't a good scorer or anything. He only averaged like 12 points a game, but it was his rebounding, which he rebounded like 14 rebounds a game or something like that. His passing, he actually averaged like 4 assists a game for a center. That's really, really good, especially his outlet passes and his intangibles, right? Just his tenacity and his intangibles, leading those teams. Even though statistically he wasn't the best player of those teams, right? It was either Alvin Hayes or Bob Dandridge doing all the offensive work, but people considered him the leader, just like how they considered Willis Reed the leader of the Knicks dynasty. They considered Wes Unseld the leader of the Bullets dynasty in the 70s. So that's why he has to be kind of up here. just impact-wise and intangibles-wise, right? He has to be up there. Okay, and let's see. I think I saw. Where is he? Yeah, Dave Cowens. Okay, Dave Cowens has to be in the top 10 as top 20 as well, because he was the second best player for two championship teams, right? Both the Boston Celtics teams, which won championships in the 70s, the 74 and 76 team. He was the second best player. Tenacious player, right? Everyone who saw Dave Cowens plays knows that he was one of the players who just gave it full out on the court, like 110%, full on tenacity, hustle, excellent rebounder. He rebounded like 13 to 14 rebounds a game, which he was 6'9", right? That's incredible. Won an MVP, leading the Celtics to 68 wins, which is actually that's a higher win count than any of the Russell Celtics. And even though he didn't win a Finals MVP, that was JoJo White and John Havlicek. He didn't win a Finals MVP, but still, he was a huge part of that team, huge contributor, and a pretty good passer as well. I think he averaged like 4 assists a game. So for all his accomplishments, he has to be in this range, top 10 to 20. Okay. Now, some of these are also pretty hard. Okay, Yao Ming. I might put Yao Ming down here. Okay. So Yao Ming had a very short prime because he was mostly injured, and I think that's part of the reason why I had to put him down here. When he was in the NBA as a rookie and during his early years, he was really good. Very polished post game. Actually, a pretty good shooter as well for a big man. He had a pretty good free throw percentage, which is not common for centers. So when he was healthy, he was good, but it's just his career was really short, and he got injured pretty frequently. His teams didn't make it very far in the playoffs, so, and like, yeah, I mean, you can consider him the first or second best player on the Houston Rockets, depending on how you view T-Mac. But anyways, that's the reason why I had to put him a little bit below top 30, I think. So someone got to round out this top 10 to 20 here. I think Jack Sigma should go here, perhaps near the end of this list. Jack Sigma because second best player on the championship team, 1979 Sonics. Pretty good shooter for his time. He was actually one of the prototype shooting big men. So that in that way, he's kind of a pioneer as well. Had a signature shot, which is his below his head shot or above the head shot, like he's doing this picture here. Pretty good team player as well, and pretty good defensive player as well. He actually led the league in defensive win shares many years. So yeah, I think Jack Sigma belongs on this list too, probably towards the end. And someone else to round out this list, probably Bob McAdoo. Even though Bob McAdoo had a very, very short prime, probably going to be like number 20-ish, actually. Yeah, Bob McAdoo's very close to this level too, but I'm going to put him this level. Yeah, very close to maybe like the number 20. Because Bob McAdoo, the thing is, he had a very short prime, but in his prime, he was like really, really good. He had maybe like a 3-year prime, and he won MVP. He won 3 scoring titles, which is not common for a shooting big man like him. So he was also just like Jack Sigma. He was like a prototype shooting big man, and led the league in scoring 3 times, and with mostly perimeter shots, actually perimeter shots and mid-rangers. So that's pretty uncharacteristic, because Kareem, for example, right, would lead in scoring based on just his hook shots and his post moves and stuff like that. Shaq would probably lead the league in scoring on dunks. But McAdoo actually led the league in scoring 3 times based on mostly mid-range and perimeter shots, which is uncharacteristic of big men, especially for his time. So in his prime, he's really good. It's just that he declined really fast, and then he became like a bench player for the Lakers, but a pretty valuable contributor for the Lakers as well. So anyways, I'll probably round out the top 20 with Bob McAdoo. Then the rest of these guys, yeah, probably in the top 20, 30 range. Got Bob Lanier, 8-time All-Star, averaged 20 and 10 through his career. Probably similar to Walt Bellamy, except he played more in the 70s and 80s. So kind of like, I would say very similar to Walt Bellamy, except like the evolutionary Walt Bellamy, if you will. Solid 20 to 10 guy. 20 points, 10 rebounds a game contributor. Robert Parrish, just very, very durable. Never considered the best player on his team or even the second best player, right? Like Kevin McHale, Larry Bird, considered better than him. But still, solid contributor, solid third option on his team. Very, very durable player. Probably played the most games, I think, out of any player in NBA history. So that's got to be worth something. Ed Macauley, very, very early star center for initially the Celtics, but then he got, get this, he got traded to the Hawks for Bill Russell, right? For the rights to Bill Russell. And then he went to the Hawks, and then that's where he played with Bob Pettit and Cliff Hagan. Then he won a championship with the Hawks, ironically against Bill Russell's Celtics, right? So it's just kind of ironic that, right? For me, like he was a star Celtic center, got traded to the Hawks, and then he won a championships on the Hawks against the Celtics, right? And he was part of the team, part of the only team to beat Bill Russell's Celtics in the finals. So that's just a little bit of irony there. But yeah, I consider Ed Macauley a step above these guys, Larry Faust and Arnie Risen and Clyde Lovellette, even though they played in the same era, because he was a better shooter than all of them, which is not common considering that this was the 1950s and people didn't shoot very well back then. But he was actually an uncharacteristic good shooter for his time. So a little bit ahead of his time there. But Ed Macauley, I think, is like a level above those guys, I think. Then Neil Johnston, I think, is actually a level above Ed Macauley. So Neil Johnston led the league in scoring 3 times, was the second best player for the championship Philly Warriors in 1956. Paul Arizin was the best player on that team, but Johnston, really good player for his time. It's actually interesting because that Warriors team was a very high scoring team because Arizin led the league in scoring twice, I believe, and then Johnston led the league in scoring 3 times. So you got 2 guys on that team which led the league in scoring 5 times total, right? So think about that, right? So Johnston, yeah, really good center and also a good shooting center too. So just like Macauley, good shooting center, but he was better than Macauley. So I probably put him above, but still in this range, just higher than Macauley probably in this range. But yeah, very, very good scorer for his era, and excellent rebounder too, because he rebounded like 11 rebounds a game. So also a good rebounder too. Very underrated player because he played in the 50s, didn't play for very long. He retired like right before, I think he retired in like 59. So, obviously most people never really saw him play. So yeah, Nikola Jokic also going here as well. Probably be higher by the time his career ends, but Jokic has shown that he's going to be one of the best centers of all time. Basically, just his talent. You've seen this playoffs, his tenacity. He's really good at passing for a center. I'd probably put his passing level on par with these guys up here, like Unsold, Walton, and Cowan's level, right? And which means that he's really good at passing, right? Because all these guys are good passing centers. So I would put Jokic up there with them. Maybe even better, actually, because I think Jokic actually averaged like 5 assists a game or something like that, which is crazy, right? That's 5 assists a game is what a guard would average, right? But Jokic is a center and he's averaging that much. So yeah, just a guy that can do everything on the floor. But he's not that athletic, right? That's the only thing that's kind of stopping him. But I think he will definitely end up his career maybe in this range right here, right? But for now, he's top 20 to 30, and I think his career is only gonna keep going up. So Embiid's another guy that I think his career will keep going up as well. I'm not sure if he's better than Jokic though. Jokic has had more playoff success. Certainly with this finals, with this playoffs, Jokic beat the Clippers, which is really, really surprising. Kind of an upset. Most people would consider that an upset, actually. Embiid has not had that level of success yet, but I think Embiid's better defensively than Jokic. Not as good of a passer, not as complete of a player. Jokic is like all around. But as a two-way player, I think Embiid's better. So it's very hard to say who's better right now, Embiid or Jokic. I think they got different strengths. Jokic, the better all-around player with his rebounding and passing. Embiid is more of a two-way player with his defense and his offense pretty much equal. So yeah, I think both these guys are among the top centers of the game today. Now I put Anthony Davis in my power forwards list, but if you consider Anthony Davis a center, then he would probably rank above these two. But these two are like right after him, right? So that's probably how I would rank the big men right now in the modern NBA. It would be Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic, and then Joel Embiid. So yep, and then last but not least, Zelmo Beatty. Zelmo Beatty's another one of those guys that gets forgotten because he played most of his prime in the ABA. But he was the best player of a championship team, right, which is the 1971 Utah Stars, which a lot of people don't know because it was the ABA. But still, being the best player on a championship team means something. He won a Finals MVP there, um, and I mean, pretty solid center. So I don't think he's up to the level of these guys. I think the reason why, a lot of these ABA guys they won rings because they weren't playing in the NBA, so they didn't have this. They didn't have the NBA competition basically. I would say if he played in the NBA, probably he wouldn't be up to this level. But just based on his stats and accolades from his ABA stats plus his NBA stats, this is probably where he belongs, right? Just a pretty solid player, probably on the level of maybe not as good of an offensive player as Walt Bellamy or Bob Lanier, but just as good of a rebounder. And yeah, Zelmo's offensive game maybe isn't as good as Lanier's or Bellamy's because these guys average like 20 points a game. He averaged like 16 points a game, but still, the difference isn't that much. And plus, Zelmo led his team to a championship, and he was the best player on that team. So that's why I'll put these guys like all kind of similar to each other. All right, so I'm actually going to make a few adjustments here. So top 20, I'm going to take out Jack Sigma. I think I ranked him a little bit high. Jack Sigma's a good player. He's like a prototype shooting big man. It's kind of similar to a lot of the shooting big men we have today. Him and Bob McAdoo are probably the prototypical perimeter shooting big men, although McAdoo is better than Sigma, right? McAdoo, his prime was short, but his prime was really, really good. Like he was a crazy player in his prime. So McAdoo deserves to be in the top 20. He'll stay there. Now, who am I going to move from the top 30? So Parrish is another interesting choice. You could argue that Parrish is a top 20 center of all time. I mean, he's a 9-time All-Star, a solid player who just had a lot of longevity, right? Played like 21 seasons. But nothing really like spectacular. Like Parrish's prime is good, but not great, right? It's nothing like a really dominant prime like McAdoo, for example. Zelmo Beatty is another one you could put in the top 20. Again, Finals MVP with the Utah Stars. Solid 16 and 10 player, but I'm not sure if talent-wise, I mean, if he's really up to these guys' level, right? I really think talent-wise, Zelmo could just be in this level with Walt Bellamy and such. Bob Lanier is an interesting choice as well. I could put Bob Lanier in top 20. He's a solid 20 and 10 player for his career, and with the Pistons, he was really good as well. His prime with the Pistons, right? It's like he'll give you like 23, 25 a night and 11, 12, 13 rebounds. So pretty good player. But I think I might actually put Neil Johnston up here. Now, hear me out. You might be wondering, why is Neil Johnston, who is Neil Johnston, right? Most of the people were thinking, no, Neil Johnston is a really good player in his era, right? Obviously, today he wouldn't be anything, but in his era, or even in the 80s, he wouldn't really be anything. But in his era, he was really, really good. He got 3 scoring titles. He won a championship, averaged 19, 11. He's probably the best center before Bill Russell came, right? I know Bill Russell's obviously better, but Neil Johnston, probably the best center before Bill Russell entered the game. That includes Ed Macauley, right? I put Ed Macauley right here. Neil Johnston's probably better than Ed Macauley. And Neil Johnston was probably the next best center after George Mikan, right? Because George Mikan was dominant, but only the early days. After George Mikan retired, during that short period of time where Philly won the championship and Syracuse won the championship, I think Neil Johnston was the best big man in the game until 57 when Bill Russell came into the league, right? So, yeah, for that short time, he was the best center in the league, and that has to be worth something. Yeah, and his stats and accolades and his win shares and everything kind of, I think he does deserve to be top 20, but just maybe like fringe top 20, like maybe number 20 or something. And then Jack Sigma is in the top 30, I think, which is where I think he ranks. Yeah, I mean, Mourning, Bellamy, Lanier, Parrish, Sigma, yeah. Beatty, they're all around the same level, I would say. And yeah, that's what I would change. And yeah, that's about it. Otherwise, I think for ABA players, it's really hard to kind of rank them because they weren't playing against NBA competition. But I have to rank them based on their awards and accolades when they played in their league, right? And ABA is part of NBA now, so I think that's fair. Mel Daniels, I still think is a level above, like Zelman B and these guys because of his accomplishments in the ABA. But yeah, I think this is where I would rank these guys. And all right, and finally for my greatest centers all time, I also want to make this change as well. You have to have at least 2 All-Star appearances to be on this list. So I'm sorry, DeAndre Jordan. DeAndre Jordan only has 1 All-Star appearance. Sadly, he's a great defensive player, great rebounder, of course. But I'm gonna have to take him out, and I'm gonna put in Karl-Anthony Towns, who I might have underrated a bit before. I mean, he's a 2-time All-Star, and he has great averages. He's averaging like 22 and 11. People might say that's because he's playing on a bad Minnesota team, but I like to think of Cat as kind of like Anthony Davis light, and it makes sense because they came from the same college, right? And he has sort of similar skills to AD, not quite as good, of course. Obviously, AD is better. Anthony Davis is better than Cat. But you can think of Cat as maybe like a light version of AD, like maybe he's like 70% as good as AD, and that's really still good enough to be in the top 40 centers all time, right? So yeah, pretty good rebounder, good offensive player around the rim, of course. Doesn't really shoot much outside of that, but I mean, still, just if you look at his stats, I mean, Embiid is probably like a level above, and then Jokic is just a different kind of center altogether. But I would say Cat is probably like a level below them, right? But not too much below. So that's why I'm going to put him in the top 40. So yeah, I think he deserves to be in there too, Karl-Anthony Towns. And yeah, that's going to be my new top 40. Took out DeAndre Jordan's, very good role player. But I think Karl-Anthony Towns at least can be an alpha dog, right? Because he was the best player on his Minnesota team, much like Kevin Love, right? For a while. So anyways, yeah, that's going to be my top 40 centers list. And yeah, that's it, guys. If you guys have any comments, I mean, this is all in my opinion, right? Obviously, you're free to disagree with me. But this is where I rank all these guys. So let me know what you guys think of my rankings. And yeah, as always, thanks for watching.